some dare call it conspiracy.
Welcome to the Some Dare Call It Conspiracy podcast, hosted by Brent Lee and Neil Sanders. After nearly 20 years exploring the world of conspiracy culture, we are taking our guests and listeners on a guided tour of the rabbit hole. Our mission? To discover where the truth lies.
History is written by the Whiners. History is a lie agreed upon, and so is the present day when navigating the narratives of the internet's conspiracy crowd. But luckily, we have a swathe of talking heads who are here to separate the wheat from the chaff, sift through the bullshit, and amplify the white in the white noise. They are here to tell us the truth, no matter how unpalatable, bigoted, and fallacious this might seem to reasonable or informed people. In the USA, they have entire networks dedicated to distributing this modern-day 2 minutes of hate. It can be highly lucrative to wind up the credulous and furious, and these outlets, namely the Daily Wire, One American News Network, Rebel TV, Turning Point, and others, do very well, and they've directed more people to the right wing than a stewardess during a crash landing. These outlets can loosely be described as purveyors of news, in the same way that a dirty protest can loosely be described as an example of elegant home decoration. In the UK, we have the propaganda network GB News and Talk TV. They are very much the Robbie Williams to America's Justin Timberlake in this regard, the Jim Davidson to their Dave Chappelle, or the Scunthorpe United to their Dallas Cowboys. Essentially, they do the same thing, but with wildly different standards of aesthetics and with far less talent, charisma, skill, and panache. The main through line is a mixture of right-wing and far-right politics and performative outrage deployed through the lens of conspiracy and faux anti-government sentiment. But, as I believe Shakespeare once said, there are levels to this shit. And if we think of Alex Jones and David Icke as top-billing prize fighters slugging it out against the Illuminati on a pay-per-view from Las Vegas, then people like Russell Brand, Lawrence Fox and their ilk are a man killing rats with a hammer in a ring of hay bales in a dimly lit back room of an abandoned warehouse in Kidderminster. Often, their path to enlightenment just so happens to coincide with a spectacular public fall from grace and the disintegration of prior contacts and opportunities in the media industry, usually due to some dreadful statement or action in the midst of a tantrum. This triggers a need to take stock, to understand the world more clearly and reappraise what is important in a spiritual awakening and reinvention which is entirely organic and nothing to do with them becoming completely unemployable by any organisation with a degree of sense. For examples, see Russell Brand, Lawrence Fox, Katie Hopkins and others who, unfettered by the constraints of journalistic ethics, moral standards or an employer who is accountable for them, they are finally free to tell people exactly what they want to hear on the internet. This is in order to make their audience, and to a degree themselves, feel superior, like they are plucky freedom fighters being persecuted for standing up to tyranny. Techniques to get an audience on side will involve love bombing, flattery, the implication that they are super smart for figuring out what the narrator is spewing at them, and the concept that anyone who disagrees with them just isn't that clued up. Handily, this type of rhetoric often also helps to justify their audience's hatred of certain groups, such as foreigners or trans people, while simultaneously positioning themselves as the real victim, which is win-win, unless of course you are foreign or trans or have a modicum of human decency. If you think that this is in some way manipulative or cynical, perish the thought. Maybe you need to unplug from the matrix. This can be achieved by the use of health supplements and by altering the avenues by which you receive news, opinions and facts. Thankfully, most of these people have access to these things. They really couldn't be more helpful in guiding you on your journey. I mean, sure, you might have to cast aside dead weight in the form of friends, family, or work colleagues, but who's to say they weren't holding you back anyway? Think of these things as like the skin a snake would shed, the chrysalis you discard as you evolve into a butterfly, or the weaker conjoined twin that you must batter to death in their sleep so that you can take sole ownership of your kidney. The phrase cult gets bandied around in regards to these people, but I think that may well be a misspelling. This is a mission to these people, their true calling. I mean, sure, they have very little choice in regards to work, but I'm sure these humble prophets do this purely out the goodness of their own hearts and a firm desire to set people free from mental slavery and the victimization at the hands of the woke. And all they ask for, in exchange for these revelations and confirmations of inherent biases, is praise and a constant flow of money. The question that interests me is whether or not these people believe their bullshit, have convinced themselves of their own bullshit, or have so little integrity and respect for themselves and their followers that they will simply lie to their audience's face for money. A prominent figure on this depressingly shit scene is former BBC historian and TV presenter Neil Oliver. Oliver first appeared on our TV screens over 20 years ago. Fresh-faced, with flowing black hair, he looked like the sort of person you would see in a velvet jacket and ruffled shirt, gently bobbing their head at a Sisters of Mercy concert. But recently, he's adopted a more dour and dishevelled appearance, akin to the sort of person you might find living in a shack in the woods, and has adopted the personality of an end-times preacher or a small-time cult leader, like Charles Manson, but without the charisma. He isn't on the BBC anymore and has adopted quite the conspiratorial outlook of late. This, combined with his downbeat personality and the fact that his hair looks a bit like floppy ears, has led my co-host Brent to give him the simply brilliant nickname Tinfoil Eat-All. Following studying for an MA in archaeology and a stint as a journalist, Oliver was plucked out of obscurity in 2002 by a BBC talent scout who liked his Mr. Darcy-esque looks and felt that he would be the perfect host for historical TV shows. The same year, he was given the prestigious honour of providing the voice for the narration on the fleet of Glasgow sightseeing tourist buses. But he didn't let that go to his head, and over the years he hosted several popular history documentaries, and the thing that he is most well known for, Coast, in which he wanders up and down various coasts. The last of these was filmed in New Zealand in 2016, at which point he began writing a column for the newspaper The Times. Then, in 2021, it all started to go wrong. Oliver, a TV historian and MA-level educated archaeologist, declared that the lockdown in the UK, done to combat the spread of the COVID pandemic, was, and I quote, the biggest mistake in history. This immediately made some doubt his credentials as a serious historian, noticing some pretty poor decision-making in the past, leading to events such as the Holocaust, the slave trade, the Holodomor, or the continued hiring, promotion and televising of James Corden. Oliver also compared the UK government's COVID measures to Nazi Germany, so he can't even use the excuse that he hadn't heard of them when he was making his previous statement. In August of that year, he continued his childish tantrum by saying that he would gladly catch COVID for freedom. He was picked up by GB News and became a hero to legions of self-centred, inconsiderate melts that put their own minor inconveniences over measures designed to try and stop people from dying. He was also critical of vaccines too, because of course he was the absolute weapon. He said that masks were designed to instill fear and blinded people to the reality of manipulation and mass hypnosis used to make them and to keep them compliant. I think he might have confused masks with blindfolds, which is easily done. Unfortunately, this led to Oliver being asked to leave the board of These Islands, a pro-union group that does not wish Scotland to have its independence. Not the confusion over masks and blindfolds, it was the other stuff, the mental COVID stuff. Oliver eased himself into the conspiracy world by complaining about the set tropes that free thinkers all adhere to and began doing monologues on GB News, incorporating these topics into his baleful laments, and this made me even more convinced that he was a goth. They should have called his show The Monologues. Thank you, I'm here all week. Some say that his choice to do monologues is a sure sign of attention-seeking and indicative of a deeply troubled and potentially sociopathically narcissistic mind. Anyone that does monologues should be viewed with the utmost suspicion. Nevertheless, Oliver took to his new role as a fear-porn pimp with aplomb, and soon he was publicly covering himself in more shit than G.G. Allen. During a monologue delivered on his GB News programme on the 4th of February 2023, Oliver spoke of a silent war waged by generations of politicians in order to take total control of the people and impose one world government. And this is a reference to the document Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, which was published by luminary of the conspiracy world Bill Cooper in his book Behold a Pale Horse, which was also a favourite of the Oklahoma bombers. They also liked the Turner Diaries, and that's not a biopic of Ike or Tina. The origin of the Silent Weapons document is best described as laughably implausible bullshit. The story goes that an employee of Boeing bought a spare photocopying machine for the parts from McCord Air Force Base in 1986, only to discover the document had accidentally been left inside. The document is supposedly a manual detailing how the Illuminati will take control of the world's population in a covert manner. So this was a pretty catastrophic mistake made by the Illuminati, who are usually so very careful about this type of thing. Leaving your secret plans for world domination inside a photocopier tends to portray this so-called Illuminati as less Marxist New World Order and more Marx Brothers. Also, and this is important, the document is utter bollocks. It makes less sense than a Salvador Dali painting. It literally claims that economics is gained by the Illuminati because they view it as similar to electrical circuits. Dear listener, it is not. This is one of the many clues that this might not be a genuine document detailing the highest level plans of a sinister group that controls the world, but, at the same time, are stupid enough to leave their elaborate plan in a photocopying machine. Bill Cooper is also not the most reliable of characters. Popular theories of his involve the driver of the JFK motorcade being the real assassin in that case, UFOs and underwater craft of extraterrestrial origin being real and hidden by the government, cults such as the Brotherhood of the Snake ruling the planet, and a belief in the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which details how Jews rule the world. Although Cooper did say that the famously anti-Semitic document was flawed in as much as the word Jew should be replaced in every instance with the word Illuminati. David Icke has stole this concept and pretends that it is his own, as if this makes the document any more credible. The document is a known fake that simply plagiarizes three well-known sources and cobbles together a story designed to be used to persecute Jews. Interestingly, Cooper hated David Icke, thinking that he was spouting New Age occultic nonsense. He also hated Alex Jones, who he labelled as a liar after he irresponsibly told a live audience on New Year's Eve 1999 that missiles had been launched at targets in the United States of America. Cooper also hated popular conspiracist Jordan Maxwell too. He was, by all accounts, an unpleasant alcoholic who was uncomfortably close to the Ku Klux Klan and who eventually died in a shootout after shooting a policeman in the head. For a supposed historian, Oliver is remarkably unquestioning of his source material. Cooper is best known for supposedly predicting 9/11 and saying that Osama bin Laden would be blamed for it but would not be the culprit. Sounds impressive, eh? It isn't. You see, bin Laden at the time had made public statements that he was planning to attack the USA and had helped the attack on the USS Cole earlier in the year. He had formed for this, having arranged the bombing of the World Trade Center in the 90s, and CNN had reported that bin Laden, a known terrorist, was threatening an attack on the United States of America. All that Cooper actually did was read the headline and say, if there is an attack and they say Osama bin Laden did it, then it wasn't him, it was the New World Order. Alex Jones shamelessly stole this, and he too claims to have predicted 9/11, but he too is lying. Jones just repeated the line that Cooper said, but claimed that the attack would be in Oklahoma City. On the day of 9/11, Alex Jones told his listeners that the EU was responsible in a plot to make the USA adopt the euro as currency, which goes without saying is an extremely cretinous reading of the scenario. He didn't mention bin Laden once, and Jones has berated Cooper several times on his InfoWars shows for being a foul-mouthed, overweight alcoholic. Oh, how the tables have turned. In May 2023, Oliver retweeted an image featuring Bill Gates, writing, "Bill Gates, the textbook example of the danger posed by rich and powerful people, utterly devoid of empathy or care for individual human life." The image featured Nazi, satanic and Illuminati imagery with reference to the New World Order. For some reason, it also had pictures of Jeffrey Epstein and Anthony Fauci, and the image showed Gates as a Nazi experimenter with a swastika and an IG Farben logo on his clothing. The original source for the tweet was Liz Churchill, a profoundly stupid and abhorrent person who really doesn't deserve any further explanation than that. In July 2023, Oliver asserted on GB News that reported high temperatures recorded during that summer's heatwave, some reaching into the mid-40s, were fabricated and designed to spread fear about climate change. He accused the BBC of measuring ground temperature instead of air temperature to artificially inflate the numbers. But he was corrected by BBC meteorologist Thomas Schaefnaker, who explained that it was absolutely not true. And to add to his embarrassment, the Met Office confirmed that all temperatures reported were taken at a height of 1.25 metres, and that the ground temperatures would be even higher. Evidently not done with being humiliated for his lack of knowledge, Oliver decided to debate Dr. David Lloyd on the safety of vaccines in September 2023, and yet again he had his arse handed to him. Oliver suggested that people are dying of unknown causes in hospitals, surmising that it could be the vaccines that were rolled out during the pandemic. But Dr. Lloyd pushed back, saying, "I think you're completely wrong there. The mRNA vaccines are phenomenally safe and have the most fantastic potential." Oliver responded by saying that the vaccines were unquestionably causing deaths, to which Dr. David Lloyd said, "The health-benefit ratio of using vaccines in COVID is overwhelmingly favourable," before questioning Oliver's use of unquestionable. In January 2024, Oliver, still not sick of making a complete fool of himself, argued on GB News that the coronavirus vaccine caused a condition called turbo cancer in children, which isn't a real thing, and has absolutely zero supporting evidence to back it up. The man seems more of a glutton for humiliation than Max Mosley. Also, in January 24, he decided to inject some danger into his family's lives and invited Russell Brand to stay at his home. At this time, he began to refer himself as Conspiracy Gandalf, but the sycophantic way that he panders to any old nonsense that benefits him makes Grimer Wormtongue a far better comparison. Brand has recently become a Christian and was even baptised in the Thames River. Many argued against this, as there is quite enough excrement floating in the UK's rivers already thanks to the government's policies. This was obviously completely genuine from Brand, and in no way an insultingly transparent attempt to rehabilitate his image and trying to encourage people to forget that he's been accused of being a dangerous predator with a penchant for rape. The offer of a place to stay from Oliver was, I'm sure, born out of genuine friendship for the accused sex pest, and in no way a really tacky way to try and increase his profile with Brand's followers. So anyway, I decided to check out one of Oliver's monologues on his YouTube channel. Often people use sensationalist, hyperbolic titles to get attention, but this is obviously beneath Oliver, who we must remember was once a professional broadcaster. His latest film is titled Evil, Evil, Evil! And has the hashtags #NeilOliver, #Nazis, and #Boris Johnson. For a brief second, I hoped that the title Evil, Evil, Evil indicated that he might be reviewing a new Misfits album that I hadn't heard about, but sadly that hope quickly faded away. The thumbnails for all his videos share a theme. Oliver appears in them looking very much like a man who reeks of stale cider and is liberally stained with his own piss, aggressively shouting at you through the passenger side window as you're trying to leave a pub car park. The first thing I notice is his glassy, unblinking eyes. They are cold and strangely without emotion, like a great white shark or Tom Cruise. He tends to stare through you as if you don't exist, like a person working at the post office might. Oliver has the disturbed 1,000-yard stare of a PTSD-riddled Vietnam combat veteran, the survivor of a terrorist atrocity, or someone who's had to endure 10 minutes with James Corden. It's difficult to know if this is due to emotion, if it's an affectation, or simply the grim realization of the course that his life has taken. This, combined with his greying beard, gives him the look of a taxidermied badger. His voice is soft and measured, slightly lilting, and yet with an undercurrent of foreboding, which is exactly like how I imagine the recorded voice is that tells you what buttons to press in the pods at Dignitas. Behind Oliver is an Indiana Jones-style hat. It's not unreasonable for an archaeologist to relate to the character of Indiana Jones, but in Oliver's regard, fighting with Nazis might well be frowned upon by his employers and potential viewers. He isn't wearing his trademark scarf cum cravat that he's closely associated with. Sartorially, it sits equidistant between Quentin Crisp and Grandad from Only Fools and Horses. But sadly, today it is absent. The video is called Thought of the Week, which to me implies that one a week is his uppermost limit. It is said that the test of intelligence is to be able to hold two ideas in your head simultaneously. Does this suggest that it would take a fortnight for Oliver to achieve this? The film starts with Oliver saying,
"Greetings to all you wonderful people out there already aware of me and what I do."
and I immediately dislike the insincere bastard. This strikes me as the same love-bombing, flattery-based manipulation that we see from most of these fake guru types. I notice that while he is speaking, there is a strange plinky-plonky music playing that reminds me of a high-end spa, a mid-level dentist, or quite a posh brothel. And this is apt, as Oliver immediately starts asking his followers to send him money.
You know that quote from, what is she, a German-American, American-German, can't remember which way around it is, writer, Hannah Arendt.
This is another tactic that these talking heads use, acting as if they are speaking directly to you, and this is to build the idea of a personal kinship and interaction, when in fact this is at best a parasocial relationship and at worst exploitative and borderline abusive. Arendt reported on the trial of Adolf Eichmann and coined the phrase the banality of evil. This was because Eichmann, who helped plan and facilitate the transportation of huge amounts of Jewish people to camps during the Holocaust, was strangely dull and bureaucratic. He was neither perverted or sadistic, and was described by Arendt as terrifyingly normal. Although the acts were evil, it was suggested that Eichmann did not have evil intent, but was simply doing his job, and was able to mentally disconnect his role from the outcome. I wonder where this is going, fully expecting a comparison of the UK government's COVID response to the Holocaust. The idea being those who facilitated it were too just doing their jobs, and in Oliver's mind are just as evil. It goes without saying that this is an acutely idiotic opinion.
And I think about how many people in positions of power over our lives are knowingly overseeing the dismantling of the civilization of the West.
Crikey! I did not expect that. Thank heavens he isn't being overly dramatic.
Countries like Britain and countries like America, obviously, are being dismantled right before our eyes, and the ways of life that have been possible here for a couple of hundred years or more are just being taken apart bit by bit, like an old mechano structure.
200 years ago, the 19th century. I mean, I suppose he's right. There no longer exists the opportunity to work for Napoleon. You can't be a slave trader anymore, and there are scant opportunities to work for the East India Tea Company or to be involved with the British Raj. None of us will ever get the chance to promote the newly invented Colt revolver. Also, being pedantic, Britain is a collection of countries, and you build a Meccano set, you don't take it apart. But hey-ho, if I was desperately suspicious, I would think that this was a none-too-subtle dog whistle suggesting that immigrants and LGBT people are in some way ruining society. However, this is incredibly close to the fascist concept of nations as organisms being rehabilitated by outside influence, and I doubt that Oliver would be that foolish and irresponsible to mean this. Why, that would mean that he was a ludicrous person and not one to be taken seriously at all.
And furthermore, the same people that are overseeing that dismantling are also overseeing death, overseeing the death of fellow human beings. And while they do so, they're only seeing pound signs and dollar signs that result from all their banal evil.
He doesn't have the self-awareness to recognise this, but he's describing himself. He's also describing David Icke, Russell Brand, Lawrence Fox, Alex Jones, and his employers GB News. These have all petulantly whinged about COVID restrictions and given out terrible advice for people to ignore safety measures and eschew vaccines and social distancing. They have undoubtedly killed people, their own fans and followers, and all for money and attention. But he goes on, postulating that they actually enjoy creating chaos and death. Who they are isn't fully explained. Usually in this sort of rant it refers to Jews, or the bankers who just happen to be Jews, or the wealthy who by sheer coincidence are either Jewish or, if not Jewish, described as crypto-Jews, secret Jews who rule the world clandestinely. It's not clear if Oliver explicitly means that or if he's just using the trope. But he is very sure that
nonetheless, overseeing the dismantling of the West is what they're doing.
Which again sounds very much like a dog whistle for the fascist Great Replacement theory. This theory states that immigration is replacing white people, and this is also called white genocide. Now, I have said this before, but no one actually gets replaced in this theory. White people still exist, it's just that they do so alongside non-whites. In fact, there isn't actually any genocide in this white genocide, and you can't find a better example of white privilege than that. They are condemning hundreds and thousands of men, women and children to death, Oliver rants, and I wonder for a brief second if he's talking about capitalism.
How are we to understand behaviour like this? I think some of it has to do with ego.
And at this point, I noticed that the reading on his self-awareness gauge has plummeted perilously into the red, and simultaneously, the dial on my irony detector has flown to the extreme right, broken off, and is bouncing across my coffee table. Oliver continues.
So I need to rewind a bit, probably. I have had to admit to myself that for the first 50-odd years of my life, I was too blind to see what was happening around me. I didn't pay attention to events in the macro, in the micro.
I'm not sure what he means here, and to be honest, I don't think he exactly knows what he's talking about either. He may well be referring to macro, which is a chain of cash and carries.
And it's been an embarrassing, it's even been a humiliating process of self-realisation.
Is he talking about working at GB News?
You know, like a lot of people probably, I thought I was smart.
Oh, fuck me, here we go. This is the sort of arrogant, faux self-depreciation that all of these wannabe gurus use to manipulate their audience. It seems like self-reflection, like they had the bottle to admit that they were wrong, and then they grew and evolved with new knowledge. But it isn't that at all. It's just a way to brag about how really smart they are now, and to imply to the audience that they too can throw off the shackles of previous beliefs and become enlightened like the host. And you can trust them. I mean, look at how open and vulnerable they are. Look at how honest they are, admitting to knowing nothing in the past. These are people that you can trust. These are people that can help you. I mean, it might not be free, but it's worth it. It's a transparent attempt to be a massive wanker without admitting to being a massive wanker. It's obvious flattery of the audience, playing into and justifying their paranoia. He's more full of shit than Johnny Depp's duvet cover. The grift goes on.
You know, I thought I was quite well educated. You know, I'd finished school, I'd been to university a couple of times, and I thought I knew what's what. You know, I thought I had a handle on what was going on. But the last few years, the last 3 or 4 years, have provided me with the most confronting and humbling education so far in my life.
I suspect he's talking about having to work in the same building as alleged sex pest Darren Grimes, but I could be wrong.
Too many people are still convinced they're smart and well educated, and as a result, they stubbornly refuse to admit that they've got it all or most of it wrong.
This is from a man who has been regularly shown to be clueless on his own TV show on a number of subjects. He's been proven to be completely uninformed on a plethora of topics from COVID to vaccines to climate change and to instances of cancer. Each time, an expert thoroughly had his pants down and made him look like an idiot, and yet he stubbornly refuses to admit that he got it wrong. This man is a buffoon. He proceeds.
You know, a lot of them did at the time and still are cheerleading all that was wrong, thinking it was right.
It's been about 7 minutes, and I still have no clue what he's talking about, but that is sort of the point. You can throw around vague phrases and the audience can apply their own pet hate, be that the lockdown, vaccines, immigration, or whatever terrifies and confuses them. And then, finally, he gets specific.
You know, the so-called vaccines and the lockdowns and all the rest of it. And they, you know, and they shouted about defending democracy in Ukraine and so on and so on. And they've been about that business for far too long. It's so long, in fact, that I would say that the stupid smart people, for such as that is what they are, They seem to have opted simply to keep their heads down at best. At best, because accepting and coming to terms with the realisation they were, like me and many others, too dumb, or at least too gullible to see what was going on.
So you now see that all his previous humbleness was all in service of him basically saying that he's smarter than everyone else. It's childish. His main concern, though, is why aren't people as terrified of the made-up shit that he's terrified of? He's wondering why the general population are not up in arms about the things that he is concerned about. And you have to remember that this man is exceptionally clever, more clever than you. And he knows this because he used to be stupid like you. He misses the rather obvious and far more likely explanation that he's just wrong. He confirms this by saying,
that admission, that self-admission is just too much for too many people on account of their egos. Can't do it. Admitting they were wrong is still beyond them. And it might remain beyond them even as they finally topple into their graves.
This is a man who is moaning about conditions from 4 years ago. Conditions that he has to lie and exaggerate about in order to make them seem sufficiently scary. This man is a prize prat. We then shift gears violently and finally start the main event of this fear porn, war. And Oliver seamlessly morphs into a purveyor of Russian propaganda. So why do the conspiracy crowd like Putin? To be honest, we could do a whole show about this, so I'll just be brief. It's down to two things. One, quite complex, and another, depressingly simple. The complex part is this. It's a combination of the need to be contrarian. If the news says that Putin is bad, then we think the opposite. And the propaganda of Russia Today, the news outlet, and a thing called mimetic warfare. Put simply, the conspiracy crowd like Russia Today because it's critical of the US and the UK government. It's been critical of wars, and it's paid lip service to ideas such as 9/11 being an inside job. What most people don't realise is that Russia Today is an arm of the Kremlin, and it exists to subtly undermine trust in Western institutions such as government. This is a concept called destabilisation. It's actually a real conspiracy, and not surprisingly one that the conspiracy crowd has missed by a country fucking mile. Mimetic warfare is spreading tropes via the internet. An example would be the concept that the US government invented AIDS. This was promulgated by Russia, and to be fair, to some people it seems possible and even plausible, especially if you're in the mindset that distrusts institutions. Now, it is wise to be wary of governments and institutions, but when your thoughts are dictated by another rival government, then that's just as bad. The second simple reason is that Putin hates gay people, he hates trans people, he's persecuted Muslims, and he's violently opposed to immigration. These bigoted positions align depressingly well with modern conspiracists.
Anyone paying attention to reality knows that Russia has won its war with Ukraine. Probably better described as a proxy war that the US and NATO indulged in, with Ukraine as the bait. Going back 2 years, it had made sense for Ukraine, via puppet Zelensky, to sign a peace deal with Russia. The same peace deal that NATO bag carrier Boris Johnson was dispatched to scupper.
And this just serves to highlight Oliver's profound ignorance. The deal that was offered by Putin was that Russia gets to keep the annexed regions of Crimea, Donetsk and Luhansk, but also, essentially, the complete eradication of the Ukrainian identity under the guise of denazification. In speeches, Putin has also expressed a desire to re-establish the border of Russia from several hundred years ago, meaning that other independent countries will be taken back under the wing of Russia, without any say in the matter. This idea that there was a deal that could be in any way accepted is simply a myth. Realistically, what does he think that this will achieve? Does he fondly imagine that Zelensky is a fan of GB News? What does he imagine might happen? Does he think that Zelensky, on hearing this, will pack it all in and solemnly explain to his country, "Sorry, but the man from BBC Gust said this is unwinnable"? He then quotes Russian propaganda verbatim, saying that over 600,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died, and he uses the term meat grinder to imply that this senseless massacre is almost automated and that the Ukrainian government are essentially sending troops to die. The truth is that this term is actually best applied to the Russians, who are constantly expanding the recruitment criteria in order to force people to go and fight and die. Ukraine has lost about 31,000 soldiers and thousands of civilians in attacks that are almost certainly war crimes by Putin. Russia has had at least 150,000 dead, and its forced conscriptions are causing mass exoduses of people from Russia to any country that will take them. But let's say that this is accurate. What does he think will happen to other Ukrainian soldiers and civilians if they do surrender? Does he think that they will just draw a line under everything and go about their day? Or perhaps there will be continued violence and death against the defeated forces that until recently were mortal enemies? It's about acquiring Russian wealth, says Oliver, and this just isn't true at all. If anything, the conflict is about expanding the Russian Empire and stealing Ukrainian wealth. You see, there is an angle to this conflict that isn't much spoken of: gas reserves. In 2013, Ukraine discovered huge gas reserves, and American firms moved in to try and exploit this. Previously, Ukraine had imported its gas from Russia, but this gave them the opportunity not only to provide resources for themselves, but also to steal Russia's clients in Europe. Russia relies on selling gas and oil to the West for its economy, and since the invasion of Ukraine, Russia has seized over 80% of these reserves from the Ukraine. He then does the whole, the Ukraine is for money laundering, which frankly gets right on my tits. Does nobody watch mafia movies anymore? Laundering is when you take illegal money, say money from drug dealing, and you wash it to make it legal. You're putting it back into the system. That means that you can pretend it comes from legitimate sources so that you can bank it or use it by spending it. However, this means that you also have to pay taxes on this money now. There is no dirty money going into the Ukraine, so there's no need to launder it. There might be embezzlement. That's where money designated for one purpose is used for another. But there's absolutely no evidence of that either. This is just bullshit. This man is more crammed full of crap than Elvis Presley's corpse. Oliver wonders,
even now, after all of it, pundits and mainstream media figures here in the UK and elsewhere continue to talk of the West standing up for freedom and democracy. It's impossible to be certain in the case of every pundit why they're still saying such things.
Well, it's because one country invaded another, isn't it, you fucking moron? This pro-Russian nonsense is extremely popular with the crowd that Oliver is trying to appeal to, as is the concept of unfettered immigration. But regardless of these tropes being that demographic's particular cup of potentially polonium-laced tea, these ideas are blatantly contradictory. In one breath, there is dog whistling about the Great Replacement theory, a large part of which currently includes the idea that men of fighting age are being secretly shipped into the country disguised as asylum seekers and are waiting for commands to spring into action and to enact a coup. Then, in the next breath, there are suggestions that Ukraine should just give in to the invading Russian army. So, in England and Ireland, we are to be terribly wary of normal civilians escaping conflict or oppression and seeking asylum, because they might very well be a secret sleeper cell army poised to take over the nation in a violent action. But in Ukraine, we're supposed to think that they should simply allow actual soldiers to take over the country as part of a prolonged military campaign which would involve the murder of civilians, the destruction of the infrastructure, and the political takeover of the entire country. It's a bit like Native American tribes being told to suck it up and get over the land that was stolen from them, the massacres they suffered, and the atrocities they endured by the girl who pretended to be possessed in the Enfield poltergeist incident. So anyway, people who just so happen to be of colour who claim to be seeking asylum must be shunned as potential invaders, but actual invaders with weapons and a track record of being fairly liberal with their attitude to using them should be welcomed and installed as the new owners of a sovereign nation, whilst violently deposing the previous legitimate regime. Apparently, people seeking asylum staying in a hotel is a massive potential threat to the UK, whereas an actual military invasion and a putsch is somehow Oliver's preference in Ukraine. How does this even begin to make sense? It's literal doublethink. It's the height of hypocrisy. There's more back and forth than a professional ping-pong player's paddle. It's like hiding in a bomb shelter from a box of fish fingers, while simultaneously encouraging others to take a leisurely swim with great white sharks. It's a position that has been surprisingly popular amongst talking heads of a certain political persuasion. possibly because in this metaphor the sharks are white? Who can say? Either way, logic has gone out of the window like a Russian businessman. In a way, Oliver reminds me of those Russian nesting dolls. The more you unpack him, the smaller the substance actually is. But his thoughts on the war also remind me of one of those big furry Russian hats, inasmuch as I think he looks like a twat. Oliver blathers on.
And then, of course, we have to contemplate our leaders and those that pull our leaders' strings, whose names and faces we know not.
And this is an appeal by Oliver to the idea of a new world order, with shadowy elites pulling the strings of their puppet politicians. The thing is, we do actually know who these people are, and it isn't the Jews. You can see who the donors to political parties are. It's often people like the oil industry, people from Tufton Street, the newspaper industry, and think tanks connected to moguls such as the Kochs. One of these is Legatum, who just so happened to finance GB News, who Oliver works for. He then goes on about how much he hates unelected Rishi Sunak and unelected Foreign Secretary David Cameron, and is appalled that some US politicians seem to support Ukraine. He suggests that Cameron sees war as a way to make money. He makes no mention of the corrupt nature of politics in Russia, how Putin is a dictator that murdered oligarchs and stole their money, or literally imprisoned and murdered political rivals, or the fact that any dissent against the state is met with violence and often death in that part of the world. Oliver says that it's pointless giving money to the Ukraine because it all ends up in US banks. Two things. Firstly, this is cowardly capitulation to a dictator that has murdered civilians. This is tantamount to saying, let Russia take over any country they like. And secondly, that's because the money goes to weapons manufacturers like Raytheon, which, I might point out, totally undermines his laundering theory. We can literally see where the money has gone. This man is all over the place like Boris Johnson's love children. He then lies and says that the UK and France have already sent troops to Ukraine to fight, and reiterates that Russia has already won. He then evokes Dmitry Medvedev, who has said that the West are saber-rattlers and irresponsible scoundrels, if not lunatics. This is a man who is the deputy chairman of the Security Council of a country that has literally invaded another sovereign nation. Oliver points out that Medvedev has stated that if NATO troops go into the Ukraine, this would be a declaration of war. You know what else is a declaration of war? Invading another country. The amount of gaslighting that Russia takes part in makes one wonder how they even have enough fuel left to sell to Europe. Oliver then states that Russia is on a war footing, churning out weapons and resources at a rate of knots. He says that there's just no way that NATO could catch this up, which again somewhat undermines the thing that he's just been saying about sending Ukraine money. He then says,
and Russia has strength in depth. And what do we have here? We have serial inadequates like Rishi Sunak and David Cameron.
This is Russian macho worship that borders on the homoerotic, and I'm amazed that he hasn't shown that picture of Putin riding on a horse topless. He then goes on about how the UK state doesn't defend its citizens. This is after advocating that the Ukraine simply allows a foreign country to murder their population and take it over politically. He's opposed sending money and weaponry to Ukraine to allow their government to do the thing that he hates our government not doing. This man is a cunt. He's more confused than Kanye West at a Klan rally. He then goes into a spiel that I imagine he thought was quite clever and insightful.
You know, all of this is in part the consequences of we the people surrendering, consciously or unconsciously, willingly or unwillingly, responsibility for ourselves and our loved ones.
The man has just spent God knows how long advising that the Ukraine do this very thing.
For too long, too many of us left others to get on with the business of making and keeping us safe. Our predecessors obviously surrendered the means, the practical means to defend themselves against enemies foreign and domestic, and give all that up long ago. And the deal has been that citizens render themselves helpless, completely defenseless, like naked babes in the face of it all, on the understanding that the state would shoulder that responsibility. Don't you worry your pretty little heads about protecting yourselves. We'll do that.
What in the fucking midlife crisis is he banging on about? Is he talking about guns? This is like a militia fantasy from a man who has just lost an arm wrestle to his son and is desperate to prove that he can still cut it. I will reiterate the hypocrisy of such a statement from a man that has spent the last 10 minutes suggesting that an entire country allows a dictator from another country to take it over. This is bollocks. This is more bollocks than you'd find in Jeffrey Dahmer's fridge. He then segues into some stock New World Order twattery, and he says,
in pursuit of ends that are dictated by those who see themselves as governing not sovereign nation states in the good old-fashioned way, but who see themselves as governing the world as one. The one-world government types are behind the active dismantling of nation states, of civilization, so that they can replace it with a world reshaped in their own image.
Make up your bloody mind, man. Do you want sovereign countries like Ukraine or not? You've just criticised Sunak and others for not doing what Zelensky is doing, defending his country and his people. This bloke is all over the place like incels at an anime festival. Oliver rambles on.
Russia has made it clear that it's serious, and it's not the kind of business that the prime ministers of Europe have learned to make their own personal millions from.
He literally said earlier that Cameron saw war as a money-making opportunity. You said it was all about dollars and pounds. You're less coherent than Oliver Reed at a stag do. Also, did you see what he did? He was really clever. He replaced the word minister with miniature, skillfully implying that they aren't the equal of that macho man Putin. He must be incredibly proud of that quip. He then has a small flicker in his eye, and he smiles to himself, and you can see that he's going to try a gag. But I think he gets caught up in it, he overthinks it, and it comes across about as funny as a faulty incubator.
No doubt egos are in play, as you'd expect from men who routinely wear lifts in their shoes so they can see over their desks.
I mean, what the fuck does that even mean? Is he trying to be masculine? Is he on about Ron DeSantis? I was so embarrassed at merely hearing this cringeworthy attempt at tough talk that I briefly considered beating myself to death by continuously striking my forehead against the skirting board. And I only heard it. He said it. It is a testament to Oliver's character that he managed to turn a blind eye to such thoughts. Or at the very least, it says something about his character. Also not to split hairs, but you don't need lifts to see over a desk, as you would be seated. You might need a cushion, or I suppose you could raise the chair, but lifts in the shoes, they wouldn't help at all. He's building to a dramatic close.
The most we can hope for is that it's brinkmanship that we're dealing with, a high-stakes game of chicken. I've said before, and I'll say again, that it's my hope, at least, that these peacocks, these strutting inadequates, don't actually plan to risk their pampered, indulged existences with anything quite so final as World War III. You know, God forbid anything might happen to rumple their suits or break their windows.
I haven't heard such pathetic tough talk since I saw my friend's child's school production of Guys and Dolls. Also, does this so-called historian really think that the way to avoid a potential world war is to allow a dictator to annex another country and they will assume that they will just stop? Did that work with the Sudetenland prior to World War II? Also, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that he's mixing up his birds, so I'll give you my bird's-eye view of what I think of Neil Oliver. I don't wish to be hawkish, but all these themes seem to have become somewhat of an albatross around the old coot's neck. He seems to be trying to crane to parrot the talking points of these loons, and I'm not sure this silly goose quite gets them. But if he's swift, this turkey can swallow it and end up not looking too much of a tit. Or he can duck this, play ostrich, or stalk and swan around, puffing himself up and pretend he's speaking pidgin English, or he could just wing it, and he'll fly in this scene. It's very unlikely that he will go the way of the dodo. He can use these videos as the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, and see what works. He is a bit of a culture vulture and a warbler, and he's not averse to robbing ideas, even minor ones, but two can play at that game. And from here on in, I won't put up with any more of this chicken feed from this booby. He's a cuckoo. The man is a cock. Sorry to crow. I don't want to keep raving on. like a mad bustard. He then finishes by advising Ukrainian soldiers to surrender to Russia or submit to the fact that they will die. The man is a cowardly, quisling tosspiece. Slava Ukraine. So what is my conclusion? Oliver falls into the third category. I suspect he believes little of the nonsense he spouts. I think that he's just seen an opportunity and taken it due to the ready-made audience that are there to lap up this outrage fodder and don't mind spending their money either. He doesn't seem to actually know about the topics he's speaking about particularly well. He has a very basic grasp of tropes and is simply using them as a way to make money. He seems to know a few buzzwords, but he comes across as someone trying to fit in. On certain topics, he's more out of his depth than Natalie Wood. I was surprised at how poor an orator he is. I suspect this is because he doesn't fully understand the topics he's pretending to care about and simply can't be bothered to actually research them, even to a cursory level. This comes across as insultingly lazy and insincere, to the point of mocking, and implies a real lack of respect for his followers that would rival the Reverend Jim Jones. Sure, he might truly have felt put out by COVID restrictions and felt the need to complain like a child in the back seat on a long journey. But the rest seems painfully performative, and we're definitely talking Amdram rather than Hollywood. My take is that he's using the audience. Like an aging pop star forced to do tours of Japan, grinding out material that he doesn't relate to an audience that he actively resents. Each appearance reminding him in ever more excruciating detail how happy he used to be. Each word uttered expanding that gap between integrity and prostitution ever wider, and each smiling face in the audience driving home what a fraud he really is. He knows it's shit. He knows that it's shameful. He knows that it's dishonest and fraudulent. He knows that it's deeply, deeply sad. But what else has he got? And hey, at least he gets paid, and the audience get what they want, which is to indulge in fantasies of being oppressed rebels, playing detective, whilst leading the underground rebellion against tyrannical overlords with the special knowledge they acquired as a byproduct of being so against authority and misunderstood by society, rather than just growing up and getting on with their lives. Such is the world. I was reminded of an article that I'd read about Oliver written by a former flatmate. He said that Oliver has changed over the years. He said that he was intelligent, curious, funny, irreverent and self-depreciating. Seemingly the antithesis of the grizzled bloviator who now often pops up occasionally on my social media feeds. One of the things that he did say that Oliver had a habit of stealing jokes and phrases and claiming that they were his own thoughts. One particular incident involved a Woody Allen joke that he passed off as his own for years. It would appear that he has now transitioned from jokes to conspiracy theories. I think that the best way to sum up Oliver is by paraphrasing the popular idiom. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat shit.
Hey, initiates, it's me, Brent Lee. Just a quick intermission here to tell you about our new and improved Patreon. We've added a brand new initiate tier for those of you who want to listen to Some Dare Call It Conspiracy without the ads. This entry-level tier is only £2 a month. Or join our second-level tier and become a shill for just £4.50 a month. Not only will you get ad-free episodes of the podcast, you'll also have early access to every new episode up to a week before they're released to the public, and a premium episode made only for Patreons every month. Also included is a welcome pack of our previous content. Neil is giving you 4 of his books, including Now's the Only Thing That's Real, a re-examination of the Manson murders, motives, and mythos. I have got 8 albums to give you, from my time back as a producer and rapper. And the great Nicholas C. Gray is giving you a copy of Headache Comics 4. Plus, an invitation to join our private Discord where you can chat to the Some Dare Call It community. And finally, the Handler tier. For £9 a month, you'll get everything I've already mentioned, but you'll also get an invitation to join us live every time we record an episode. You can hop in the chat and ask us or our guests anything during the session, and you'll get to see everything that goes on behind the scenes, including all of Neil's hot takes that I have to cut out of the final mix. So, please, if you can, do consider joining us on patreon.com/somedarecallitconspiracy. Now, let's get back to the show.